one of the biggest complaints I get from women all around the world is the experience that men are only in it for the sex. And honestly, from many of the stories I've heard, it's not hard to see why they feel this way. But what if I told you that men actually settle for sex when what they desire is something much more profound? In today's video, I want to be talking about what men crave more than sex and how you can create an unbreakable bond with a man by giving him what he really needs versus what he thinks he wants. So listen, I'm not here to make excuses for my fellow men. And I'm not here to say that these things that I'm about to share will apply exactly the same way to every guy that you meet. I'm here to say that if you are interested in creating a genuine, deeply, devotionally committed connection with someone, the kind of connection where a guy can see you, feel you, acknowledge you, respect you, and when the time comes, have the greatest degree of physical intimacy, but not start with that. If you're one of those women who want to create an emotional connection with someone, if you want to feel safe, if you want to feel heard, if you want to feel understood before you open yourself up to connect with a man sexually, and then maybe he leaves, maybe he disappears, maybe he ghosts. If you don't want to go through that experience and want to create the strongest foundation for a relationship that will stand the test of time, might even go all the way into a lifelong commitment, then understanding what men want and crave, despite the form or shape in which they express it, makes a lot of sense. I hear you and I see you, but I'm also here to say that A, not all men are created equal, and B, if you understand the true desire, the true need, the true yearning, and still hold your ground, still hold your boundaries, still are able to say, hey, I'm not ready for that, and here's what I can offer, instead of thinking that the guy only wants sex, then you can create a much stronger connection with someone. You can show up incredibly high standards, and for the right guy, allow them to step up and pursue you with more clarity. And for the guys who don't want to do it, who are not into it, which is not everyone, then you can simply move away and not have to waste your time. So first thing I want to share is, what is this thing guys want? What is this thing guys crave more than sex? And I'll share it in a sentence, and then I'm going to go a little deeper today in expressing why it's not the way guys show up strongly leading this way, and also what are some of the more specific needs within this big need that you can tap into and express and facilitate and foster the right ingredients so that this amazing tree can grow, which is the connection you want. The thing men are craving more than sex is a deep emotional connection. Now, before you punch the computer or change to another video or throw a tomato at me, this is not me. This is not a YouTuber talking about this. I'm talking about a vast number of peer-reviewed scientific psychological studies that show again and again that despite initial appearances, men are deeply emotional beings who crave deep emotional connection, even if they don't show up that way initially, even if they don't have the language to express it, even if it takes a little bit of nudging for them to reveal this seated truth. I'm going to give you an analogy for you to understand a little bit better, perhaps, how this works out. Imagine a dam that is created in front of a reservoir of water. So this dam is containing the water from spilling over. As the dam grows and as the reservoir gets higher and higher, you may not be able to see from this perspective of being in front of the dam what's behind it, but there's a lot of emotion going on that's stored and pushed down and not revealed and not shared for reasons that I'll share a little bit later. So sometimes there's the crack in the dam. Sometimes there's a little bit of spillage over. Maybe there's a strong loss of someone. And that spillage over is emotional expression, emotional depth, emotional connection. Sometimes there's the birth of someone and there's an incredible sense of joy that spills over and the emotions are more clearly seen on the other side. But for the most part, the incredible pressure that's building up and pushed down based on society's norms, based on cultural awareness, is still kept behind. Now, this doesn't mean it would be unfair to say there's no water behind the dam. You just can't see it. So I'm going to go through right now. What are some of the strongest reasons why, despite being incredibly emotional beings who crave beyond sex, and I'm not here to say men don't want sex, obviously men want sex. There's so much more men want. And your ability to understand that and siphon through the guys who really show up that way, and they're still at the stage where they can't get past that urge, between the guys who actually are able to, once given the right context, go all the way into emotional connection and then go the physical route later. Your ability to understand this will give you not a hall pass to give guys a chance who don't deserve it, but a different degree of empathy so that you can make your cards work in your favor. The first reason why men don't show up leading with, I crave deep emotional connection, is because of social conditioning and masculine norms. And what do I mean by that? I mean that most men in this world today are raised in cultures that equate masculinity with some level of emotional stoicism, with not revealing too much of what's going on, with sucking it up and pushing it down, and not showing fear, with being fiercely independent, with strength of the kind that is not vulnerably in expression, minimizing vulnerability. So when you grow up with a way of looking at the world that lets you know in so many different ways that expressing yourself that way is wrong, that is not their true nature. I'm not saying that men don't want to show up and be heroic in nature, and that's not inside of them. I'm saying that the lack of vulnerability is not something that's inherently built into a man. It's something that's learned through experience. It's something that's learned through rejection, something that learned through ridicule. Second reason why men don't show up leading with an open, vulnerable, expressive, heart seeking, deep emotional connection from the start is because men fear that opening up emotionally will lead to judgment or rejection. So it's fear of rejection or judgment. Some of the work that Brené Brown has done has highlighted that many men fear that if they were to express themselves more clearly, more fully, more openly, they would be rejected by people around them. They would be rejected by men. They would be a little bit of an outcast, a weird human being, someone that is different from the norm. And that this fear of rejection, this fear of judgment from others is also part of the thing that makes men shut down and not express themselves fully. I remember even growing up listening so many times around me, men don't cry. And I don't feel that way right now. However, I heard that so often that I remember through my early years feeling ashamed of crying in front of other people because of what I heard. My mom and dad didn't say this, but society in general said this. And I heard this strongly enough to where I felt ashamed, being a sensitive human being, crying in front of other people. So I just push it down. Reason number 3, neurological wiring for emotional regulation. What does that mean? This means that men and women are wired differently. The number of connections between different parts of the brain work differently. The amount of activity in different parts of the male brain versus the female brain, by and large, there's exceptions, but by and large, works differently. So due to this wiring, many men, and it's not a small percentage, find it hard to translate the emotional needs that we have into words. So physical actions, including sex, becomes an easier way to express emotion. I'm not sure if you've ever noticed this. There's human beings who have a very hard time expressing themselves, hugging, crying, shouting. They're just more contained, and they go to a football game where it's socially acceptable to cry and shout and hug strangers, and they become a different human being. It's not that they don't have the capacity to do this sometimes. It's that it's hard under certain circumstances to express themselves this way. But physically expressing yourself is something that is easier for many men to do than to go into the part of the brain that combines language with emotion and comes out in a form of metaphorical poetry. Number 4, a huge difference in hormone, testosterone specific. Imagine that most men 10 times the hormone that regulates sexual urges. It's not a justification for guys showing up like a-holes. It is something to be said about men thinking about this and feeling this far more predominantly day in and day out. Imagine a room that has all windows open and there's a bright amount of sunlight coming in constantly. That's the way men experience sexual urges. Now imagine that you shut down the blinds and you don't completely close them, but you definitely make them so that the light is not fully shining. And then later in the day where the sun is not shining on the window so strongly, is it present? Yes, but it's not as strongly present. It doesn't permeate everything and feeling that room. Option one is the way men experience sex, constant, ever present, all around. And B, light, dimmer light, less intensity is the way many women experience, at least in that moment of connection initially, sex with someone. Now, before I share the emotional needs that men crave in emotional connection and what you can do to create a much stronger bond with them, if you're a single woman watching this, I'd be willing to bet you're not fully aware of the real root cause why you're still single. So what I've done is I've taken 13 years of helping women find lifelong commitment, life partnerships and marriages, and I put together the learnings of those experiences into a quiz you can take in about 60 seconds that will reveal to you the number one reason you're still single. If you'd like to participate, all you have to do is go to the first link in the description. You'll see a page that looks like this, answer a few simple questions, and within 60 seconds, you'll have two things: the answer to the elusive question why you're still single, and the number one thing, the number one action you can take today based on your blind spot, attract the guy you want in a fraction of the time. What are these emotional needs and what can we do to create a stronger bond? So when a guy leads with sex, you can, if he's open to it, redirect in such a way that you create a strong bond of compatibility and emotional connection first before you go the route of sexual connection. There's nothing morally wrong in my viewpoint in doing it. It's just not going to get you what you want. The likelihood that a guy will connect with you and have sex and not have earned that experience, meaning didn't work for it, and then not feel connected, not feel attached, and move on is pretty high. So that's why it's important to create this level of emotional connection, some level of friendship before that happens. The first one that I'm going to talk about today is acceptance and validation. What does that mean? That means that the more you are able to accept a guy, not saying accept his advances, but accept who he is as a human being and validate him, the more he'll be able to have that space, that back and forth with you that he's unable to have with other women. And if you want to practice something that can facilitate this, what is the soil condition that's going to create the tree that you want, which is lifelong commitment, is presence. There's a couple of things you can practice simple when you connect with a man. One is presence. The other one is don't assume that you know who he is. Don't assume, ask questions. If you're ever in doubt, if you start assuming that he is like somebody you met in the past, be willing and courageous enough to ask a question. Open-ended, friendly, fun. But the more present you are in the connection with them, the more present you are in grounding yourself, in seeing him, not jumping ahead, not thinking about your past, just being really present with them in that space of connection, that can open up the space for him to feel something that he hasn't felt in a long time. Men don't typically feel accepted. And I understand that you might be saying, of course, if they show up that way, and they lead with sex, they of course are not going to be accepted. Beyond the sexual thing, I think men are craving some level of acceptance and some level of validation for who they are, not for the caricature of who you might think they are. So the more you can be more present, 1, 2, 3 degrees more present, and validate who they appear to be, at least in that moment to you, without going all the way into the future, the more likelihood that he's going to find that space to where he can start sharing more. Second emotional need is trust and safety in vulnerability. So what does that mean? It means that guys have a need to be vulnerable. But as I shared earlier in that example with a dam, it's really hard to do it. It's really hard to feel like you can do it without being criticized, ridiculed, be seen as weird or something wrong with you. So if you want a guy to be more inclined to trust and feel safe in the presence of you in terms of being able to share vulnerably, take the lead on this. This is something you've practiced way more. This is something you've learned as acceptable from an early age. This is something you probably share with your girlfriends constantly, being vulnerable, open, expressive. So if you start with not the story of your life, But if you start with something that is unique and vulnerable for you, and then wait, give him the space to do the same thing. Don't wait for him to be the first one to share something here. If you are more equipped, more versed, and more able to be vulnerable, take the leap of courage to be the first one to, in a conversation, share something that gives him the space to say, if I were to share something like this, then I would be okay. It's safe to share something that is not just Monday conversation. Next need is emotional intimacy and connection. And I'll make it super easy for you. Go deeper on your conversations. And it doesn't necessarily just mean that vulnerability that I shared on the previous point. Is being willing to go deeper is go beyond the boring, trite, platitude questions most people ask back and forth on a date. That means that if you really want to learn to see who he is, instead of asking him, where do you work and how long have you been there? Okay, interesting questions to ask, but they're not going to help you really understand the gist of who he is or vice versa. So when you practice the art of asking open-ended questions, what do you feel most excited about in your life today? Open-ended question. Why did you decide to go into medicine, into whatever it is that the guy is doing? What do you value right now? What's something challenging that you're going through right now? Anything that's open-ended, tell me more. He shares something and you wanted to learn a bit more about it. Tell me more about that. Open-ended questions are part of the avenue that's going to help you to go into true, deeper intimacy and emotional connection versus tried, bored, rehearsed, single answer questions. Next point is recognition of effort. Recognition of effort means recognizing, as you get to know this man, the smallest little things that he does that matter to you. Men are, again, used to the idea of the archetype of sacrifice. I'm going to do this, and it's okay if I don't get validated. It's okay if I don't get recognized for it. I almost expect not to be recognized for it. It's sad, but it's true. Now, I'm not saying that it's your job to feed him with false narratives that are not true for you, but to be able to share with someone, thank you so much for opening my door. Thank you for holding space for me the other day when I shared something that was bothering me. Thank you for being so consistent. Thank you for planning dates in advance. Anything that you catch on the guy that is along the lines of what you ambition, what you really want, make sure to recognize it. The more you recognize that, the more he's willing to do it in the future, but also the more he understands that his efforts are recognized. The last one I'll share today is a sense of belonging. Sense of belonging is feeling like you are right home. It's being able to feel like you're with someone who you may disagree with them, but it's not judgmental. Someone gets you, someone understands you, someone's creating that space. Even if the guy were to lead with sex, state your boundaries. When you state your boundaries, give him a chance to change. Instead of saying, yeah, you're out completely, how dare you? Obviously, there's going to be things that demand that, but take the approach of knowing that this man is someone who might be an amazing partner for you if you give him the space to redirect his energy and saying, here's my plan for when I do that with someone. In the meantime, are you up for getting to know each other? You might be surprised at how many times I might say, yes, give him the chance. Start with shorter term, for example. If you want to start creating that sense of belonging, yeah, you can talk about great big plans for you guys in the future, but little plans, things that allow him to know that it's safe to create something in the here and now together, something fun, something different, something exciting. Also, asking for input on things that matter to you. Trust him enough to hear his viewpoint. Men are excited to add value. Men are excited to give more of themselves. So if you give them the chance to offer assistance, help, ideas, you can decide what you want to do with them. But if you offer them that, that's part of I belong because I'm seen, I'm recognized, I'm acknowledged. And guess what? If you do those things, you'll find A, guys who are way more willing to go the distance, B, guys who self-disqualify more quickly if they're not the right fit for you. And regardless of any of that, you'll find you a human being who's leading with heart, leading with openness, and not falling for the caricature that you may have in some subconscious ways placed on all men or most men without giving him the chance to show up more like who they are. Hope it's helpful, useful, insightful. If it is, It means the world to me if you click and subscribe. It's the way I can reach more women. If you want to continue learning how you can attract the guy you want without the need for gimmicks, manipulation, games, or stupid techniques, make sure to go to the next video right here.